For a couple of weeks leading up to a particular night, it felt like everywhere I turned, it was trucking. I'd turn on the TV and there was a truck wreck. I would look in the paper, there's a truck wreck. And I even got on an airplane and somebody had left a copy of a publication called Transportation Topics, and it was open to a truck safety article. And I'm like, really? I mean, somebody's trying to tell me something here.
That's Joe Freed, founding partner of Freed Goldberg and one of the nation's preeminent trucking attorneys.
It's been an amazing thing, and it really feels like I'm doing the work that I'm supposed to be doing.
I'm Michael Mogill, founder and CEO of Crisp, the nation's #1 law firm growth company. I've built my business through practice, not theory. Crisp started with just $500 to my name and has grown to over 8 figures in revenue over the last few years, earning a spot on the Inc. 500 list of the fastest growing private companies in America. Our approach has been to take everything we've learned about generating massive growth within our own organization and help the country's most ambitious and committed law firm owners do the same for theirs. In each episode of this podcast, I sit down with innovative market leaders from the legal industry and beyond to learn from those who thrive in the face of adversity, challenge the status quo, and define what it means to be a true game changer. Today, we're revisiting one of our most popular episodes on the podcast where I sat down with Joe Freed to discuss how vulnerability and fear can drive performance and impact, the importance of hyper-specialization in establishing trust and credibility, and why consistent values-aligned action build long-term reputation and results.
So to me now, when I go into a case, there's a huge expectation that some magic's going to happen. Man, it's a scary place to live, man. I mean, what if the magic doesn't happen?
That's coming up on the Game Changing Attorney podcast. Before we begin today's episode, I want to remind you that we aren't beholden to any sponsors or run any ads on this podcast. This allows us to present all of our episodes raw and unfiltered. I'm not going to push any made-to-order meal services on you or try to save you any money on your car insurance. That being said, I have one small request. If you receive any value from this podcast, please give it a 5-star review. Pay the fee so we can keep this podcast free. Joe, welcome to the podcast.
I'm so happy to be here.
So this has been a podcast, as I told you earlier, that I've been looking forward to for a very, very, very long time because you are infamous not only in the legal space, but also in the personal injury space and in trucking and so on. We have so much to be able to dive into, but I want to start at the very beginning. So almost like the origin story of how you came to be where you are, because I know that prior to focusing on trucking, you were focusing more broadly, and then even prior to that, you were a police officer. So I'm just curious as to what that evolution was like and perhaps how it all came to be.
Well, I don't know how far you want to go back, but the truth is that I'm somebody who grew up really hating bullies. I didn't know that's what I was doing, but sometimes at very young ages, but I was always somebody who gravitated toward being the guy who would stand up for the little guy and try to stop whatever was going to happen bad to the little guy and to try to fix what did happen bad to the little guy. I went to high school here in Atlanta, was born in San Diego. I lived for a little while in Israel through a war there in the early 70s and then moved back to the States. I was a young kid back then. And when you get into the law side, I did spend about 5 years in police work and went to law school during the very tail end of that. And then beyond that, did a little clerkship and then started directly into the PI world. And so within that world, I mean, I think that's where it really starts from not liking bullies. And the cases even today that I work on, I feel like the ones that I really sink my teeth into are ones where I feel like it's a bully story and I can get behind sort of defending the voiceless, the people who don't have the power, if you will, and trying to do something to equalize that power struggle.
What led to the transition from being a police officer to practicing law?
I got involved in law enforcement because I lost several friends in very close time period to accidents that involved drugs and alcohol. And as a high school senior, I put myself into an internship actually at the Fulton County Police Department. At the time they had, I think, the first DUI task force in the country. And I wanted to know, as a young idealist, I wanted to know what the world was doing to try to stop things like this from happening because it seemed like everybody was dying. While I was doing that, I spent some time in courtrooms. And sitting in a courtroom to me was like sitting in a hallowed place. I was a police officer starting when I was 19 years old, so I was pretty young. Even at a very young age, I felt that important things happen here. And I also saw with my own two eyes that justice is not equal at all. Justice is not blind at all. And despite our affirmation that it will be, it's not. And one of the big difference makers is the lawyer. And so I saw that as the place that I should go, the place that I could make a difference. I had an older sister who was an attorney at the time. She helped me make that decision. I had a judge who pulled me up one day, asked me to come talk to him, and told me in chambers, "What are you doing? Do you want to do more?" Not that law enforcement isn't a noble thing to do, because it is. That was the way it all started. So I went to law school. I did well. I'd always been a good student. Came out, did my clerkship. That was the real motivation for the transition.
And I know you mentioned you've had multiple careers, it seems like, even when practicing law, because where you've gotten to today, it seems like an overnight success, 25 years in the making. But I guess if you could speak to what that evolution was and ultimately how you landed on trucking.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to. First of all, it's been a long road, but it's been a great ride. And throughout my career, I can tell you this, that it's always really been a continuation of police work. From my perspective, I just have better resources in each stage that I'm going to tell you about. I feel like I've created better resources for myself to be a better police officer. It's just now my way that I'm acting as a police officer, I'm still going after somebody or some entity that I think did wrong and that needs to be held accountable. And so I'm still very heavily involved in investigation, the forensics, all those kind of things. That's where I think I make a difference a lot of times. And we'll talk about that. But you ask about the specifics of the progression. I started out as a med mal lawyer, and I handled primarily cases that involved birth trauma and surgical mishaps, things like that. I spent 7 or 8 years doing that, and I happened into a case that involved a car that got hit from behind and caught fire, almost like the old Pinto case. I won't tell you the whole story, but it ended up being a Ford Mustang, got hit from behind, caught fire. I didn't think it should. And that case took me on what ended up being about an 8 or 9 year focus into post-rear impact fire cases. So my first exposure to being a hyper specialist, I mean, I was a specialist when it was med mal, but when you focus down on the med mal, then there are people, and I have friends, and you know them, who specialize even within med mal into now they just do birth trauma cases, or they just do child blindness cases, or whatever it is. And so for me, I didn't intend to ever be a post-rear impact fire lawyer, but I remember going to an AAJ conference, and I was on an elevator, and somebody said, "What do you do for a living?" And I said, "I'm a lawyer." And they said, "Well, of course you're a lawyer. You're here for this." And I said, "Well, I'm a post-rear impact fuel-fed fire lawyer." And they said, "What the hell is that?" And I had to explain it. But I spent 8 years of my life doing almost nothing but post-rear impact fuel-fed fires. And what happened was, you would think, how could somebody make a living doing that? And unfortunately, I could. I mean, I say it unfortunately for reasons you understand. People were getting hurt and dying because what I thought was a pretty ugly defect. As I became more and more obsessed with that very, very narrow area, I not only became a subject matter expert in it, but people started hearing about it, largely because I would go and share what I'd learned with other people in the form of seminars. And you'd spend literally hundreds and hundreds of hours developing something, and you'd go and you'd bring it and you'd share it, which I thought was one of the great things about the plaintiff's bar, is that we're willing to do that. And so what happened is my geography grew. As my practice narrowed in its scope, my geography grew, and it truly became national. I was handling cases all over the United States, and this little punk from Georgia was handling major fire cases all over the place, and working with really great lawyers who, frankly, probably could have done it themselves, but they didn't want to spend the hundreds and thousands of hours that I had spent becoming a subject matter expert. So fast forward a little bit, and I had told Ford that if you fix this problem, I'm going to stop suing you. And at first, early on, I was a flea to them. But later, I was a big flea and a bigger flea, and then kind of a colony of fleas. I was something that eventually, I don't want to say that I'm responsible for Ford changing the design of the Mustang, but I think I played at least a small role in that. And the result of that was that at least from that point forward, there wouldn't be this problem anymore with people burning alive in Mustangs after relatively minor rear impacts. So I had achieved what I really wanted to achieve at that point. And somebody called me who was a lawyer for Ford, who remembered me saying what I said and said, okay, so we're changing the design. The funny thing is I knew that because I had just gotten thrown out of the Detroit Auto Show for climbing under the new Mustang and trying to take pictures of it. But they came down, Ford came down and settled my cases. So I woke up one morning and I literally had no cases, and I had done okay on the money side of things. That's also about the time that I ended up leaving the firm that I was with, and I was stumbling around looking for what I was going to do next. I knew for me, for Joe Freed, I'm not saying this is necessarily the case for everybody, but for me, hyper specialization was going to happen. And I think I could psychoanalyze myself and tell you that one of the reasons I do that is because I don't know that I could be a subject matter expert in lots of things at the same time. So I choose one. And it took me about a year to focus in on trucking itself. I'm happy to tell you that story too. But once I decided to focus in on it, I have made it my life. It's not a marketing ploy to say that. I mean, I spend every day working on trucking. Not only are all my cases trucking cases just about, but I'm involved in the safety world in trucking. I communicate every day with different safety directors from companies that I've sued, trying to build coalitions, trying to make changes in the safety culture, and trying to understand where we can change some motivations in the industry. So it's way beyond cases at this point. It's really trying to leave a mark on an industry that's a positive mark.
It sounds like you could have hyper-specialized in a number of different areas. You could have done a lot of good in a number of different places. I am curious as to what led you down trucking in particular.
First of all, I did not have a lot of trucking experience at that time. And I really was floating around trying to decide what to do. I took some business cases. I took a Fair Labor Standards Act case. I took a case against a broker in a real estate deal. At the time, there was also a lot of tort reform talk. I didn't know what was going to happen in the industry. And then for a couple of weeks leading up to a particular night, it felt like everywhere I turned, it was trucking. You know, I'd turn on the TV and there was a truck wreck. I would look in the paper, there's a truck wreck. And everywhere I looked, it was trucking. I even got on an airplane and somebody had left a copy of a publication called Transportation Topics, which I still am a subscriber to. And it was open to a truck safety article in the seat back pocket in front of me. And I'm like, really? I mean, somebody's trying to tell me something here. Within a few nights of that airplane ride, I was tossing and turning in bed, and it was well after midnight. And the internal dialogue for me was, it's time to figure out what you're going to be when you grow up. It's got to be specialized, but what's this supposed to be? Well, I think something's saying to me I'm supposed to do this trucking thing. I don't know. Trucking is different than auto products and med-mal because people are happy to send you the product case. They're happy to send you the med-mal case because of the cost and the risk of those cases. But people look at truck cases as kind of a gem case, and they're not going to need to refer the case. But they're not really specialists, and neither am I. I mean, I wonder if there is enough to dig into to really make this a specialty onto itself. And long and short of it is about 3 o'clock in the morning, I decided I was going to be a truck accident lawyer. I know now lawyers look around and they see ads everywhere. Everybody's a truck lawyer. At the time, people laughed at me. The next day I went in early in the morning. Literally, it was the first time I was energized in a long time. I went in, I was waiting for my, at that time, staff of one person to come in who left with me from my old firm. So I could tell her what my midlife crisis moment was or what I was thinking. And I was taking myself off of all these boards that I had been put on. I was sending messages to people who were on these product boards that I was on for the fuel-fed firework that I had been doing. I'd gotten some notoriety and had gotten put on some national boards. And I was writing to them. I went to sleep last night an auto products lawyer. I woke up this morning, I'm a truck accident lawyer. And the people who were up that early were responding to me saying, what did you drink last night, man? I mean, first of all, you've got this incredible practice where you're making a lot of money. And you're just going to stop doing that? You're going to stop just like on a dime? And my response was, yeah, I'm already stopped. It's done. That's in the past. And so about 8:15 that morning, the phone rings. But you got to understand this. I had no trucking cases. when this decision was made. And so the phone rings. It's about 8:15 in the morning. It's actually a little bit before that. I pick up the phone. I'm in my new little office. I'm renting space from a good friend of mine, all on my own at the time. And this lady with a kind of a far off voice starts to talk to me. And she said, "Is this Joe Freed?" I said, "Yes, ma'am. How can I help you?" And she said, "At 3:00 this morning, my husband was killed." And I said, "I'm so sorry to hear that. What happened?" And she said, I don't know, but I know that he got hit by a truck." And I thought, really? I mean, this is some weird stuff, man. And this is almost like, did I cause this? No, I hope I didn't cause it, But that's kind of the thought I had. I said, "Well, how did you know to call me?" And she said, I don't really know how I have your name. I mean, I don't know if somebody in law enforcement gave her my name. At the time, I probably had a website, but I certainly wasn't a trucking website. And of course I said, "Well, don't talk to anybody else. I'm on my way to come see you." And right about that time, one staff person came in and I said, "We're now a trucking firm. That's what all we're doing. And I'm on my way to sign up our first client." That was a few weeks before Thanksgiving of whatever year that was. And by the end of the year, I had 4 trucking death cases. But from the moment I made the call to do this, I blew up the other bridges. You can imagine I continued to get phone calls for product cases that would have been multi-million-dollar product cases. I turned them down, and I didn't have many cases. Instead, what I did is I took a lot of steps to become a real subject matter expert in trucking, studying the regulations, studying the training, studying what does it mean to be a CDL driver, all the things that I now go around the country and try to teach other lawyers about. It was the early stages of developing what I now believe to be best practices and that I teach about all over the country. So long story, but that's how it all started. And it's been an amazing thing. And it really feels like I'm doing the work that I'm supposed to be doing.
So that's absolutely incredible to me in the sense that there's really a few things at play here. One, you just decided to become the trucking lawyer and then the following day you were. And it seems like many attorneys struggle in the sense of they say, "Well, I don't know if I could be the trucking lawyer yet or the med mal lawyer or what have you." But essentially burnt the ships and made that commitment. Now, what's fascinating to me about that is you mentioned that when you started, you didn't have any trucking cases. So I imagine that probably took a great degree of commitment and maybe even confidence in knowing that you would be okay. But I guess what was going through your head at that time when essentially you're turning everything else away and you don't have any trucking cases, but you know that that's the path you want to go down?
I'll be honest with you, I was scared to death. The truth is, the more we spend time getting to know each other, the more you'll see that fear has driven so many things in my life and directionally what I've done. But I was scared. That's about the time I looked to become a partner with Michael Goldberg and at the time Buck Rogers. And they had trucking experience. They had worked together on trucking defense at Dennis Corey in Atlanta at the time. And I came to them and we had decided we were going to sort of team up as a firm. And I went to them and I said, "I think we should market ourselves as the truck lawyers." And their response, which was the world's response at the time, is, "We won't get enough business. It's too narrow. People will stop thinking about us for other things and we'll end up shriveling up into a nothingness." And I said, "Okay, well, I'll do it myself then. If you don't want to do it, I'll market just me in that direction." But ultimately, they trusted in the vision and they delved into it. And they already had a lot more expertise than I did. And we started from the beginning to, at the time, more than brand ourselves, we had to first teach the world that this was a subspecialty, if you will, that this is not just a marketing ploy to get trucking cases, that there was enough substance, enough difference between handling trucking cases and handling auto cases that the world needed people who were specialists in this area. And while we were doing that, we were branding ourselves into the leadership of that sort of new space, if you will. And I think that timing is important because I think that as we were doing this, there was at least some other hyper specialization starting. There were already people doing just med mal. There became more people, for instance, starting to focus on nursing home cases and becoming really true specialists in nursing home. And there were a few things like that. The idea of hyper specialization was in its infancy. I think it still is in its infancy, because if you compare us lawyers, the legal field, to, for instance, the medical field, where you see what specialization is there, and you ask yourself, are we really doing anybody any favors pretending to be generalists? You know where my leaning is.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you because of the challenge of commoditization, particularly in the legal space, with so many options for consumers, that a way to differentiate is to truly pick a niche focus. But not only is it just from a differentiation and perhaps case acquisition sense, but when you specialize it, especially hyper specialize, you can become the best at it. And there's always room for the best. But I want to ask you in the sense that I'm sure that given the value of trucking cases, who would not want to be the trucking lawyer? But I would imagine that not everyone could be as successful. In a sense, to hyper-specialize, you also have to have a degree of passion towards the area that you're hyper-specializing in. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that if all you're doing is trying to figure out a way to make a buck, I feel for you. That's got to be a tough place to be. The message I try to tell my kids, I really, truly don't care what you decide to do. My prayer for you is that whatever they decide to do, they do it from a place of passion. And then it's a lot easier to put those 15-hour days in that it sometimes takes to be successful at it. It's less a job and more of a calling or a ministry, if you will. And I mentor people all the time, and I help them, whether they tell me they want to be a truck lawyer and be my competitor, or they tell me they're just looking for a way to do this. And what I do sounds like a lot of what you were saying in your book. I help them look for their passion. I mentored a lawyer not long ago. He was recently on his own, and he wanted to figure out directionally where to go. He was so focused on just areas of law. And he was saying, well, this one basically makes more money than this one. Well, we took a break from our discussion about law, and I was saying, well, tell me more about you. A lot of people, because I speak very openly about it, know that I have a son in recovery, and he's doing great, thank God now, but it was quite a roller coaster for my family. And I know a lot of people have been there and are there. And some of those cases, people aren't doing well. So prayers for all of you out there who are dealing with that. But he was telling me about how his interaction with that world and the mental health component of that world and how it's interrelated to some degree and in some ways. And man, you could see this guy's face light up when he's talking about these people and their struggle. And yet, here's what you and I both know, Michael, there's still a stigma. And you work with lawyers all over the place. They wouldn't tell you, I want as many cases where I represent drug abusing, alcohol abusing, people who are addicts, and that's who I want to be representing. But I made the suggestion to the guy because he's in the PI space. How do you distinguish yourself? I said, nobody wants those cases, but dude, if I'm sitting on a jury and I just heard you talk the way you talk about this, I'd give you millions of dollars. And I'd start to understand the true plight of these people who are on this journey that touches just about every family in America. And man, wouldn't that be something? So he just recently contacted me. He said, dude, I think I'm going to do it. I think I'm going to start marketing myself as the guy who works on these kinds of cases. And whenever they are in PI, I want to be the guy who helps tell the damages story. And to me, that guy's a hero, man. And I think he's going to be really successful.
I love it. And Joe, I would say that the results that you've experienced have certainly been, should we say, uncommon. When you look at it, I think I saw on the website that there's been over 100 seven-figure verdicts in the last 10 years, handled cases in over 30 states. The results have been over $1 billion. And look, money is not everything, but oftentimes those verdicts are proof that what you're doing is successful. And I'm just curious as to what it is that you believe you are doing differently, because I know you've mentioned that perhaps fear is driving you, but I also sense a degree of obsession behind what it is that you do.
Well, some of those results are partners and things like that. Those aren't all mine. I just want to be very clear about that. We have had a lot of success, and I'm proud of that. And so, I mean, really, I'm taking your question as, what do you think is happening differently? And part of it is a passion. Part of it is a refusal to buy in to the limiter for most plaintiffs' lawyers. When you look at the value of a case, is the plaintiff's lawyer themselves. If, God forbid, you ever need a plaintiff's lawyer, the interviewing question that you should ask them is, tell me what you think about my damages, not what you think a jury might do. Tell me what you think, because I'll tell you what, folks, when your lawyer says, I think what a jury will do is X, what they're really telling you is what they think. That's the truth. It's one step removed, but it's easier to say, well, a jury's not going to like you. A jury's not going to like the fact that you were a drug addict. A jury's not going to like, I think a jury would return a verdict of X. That's really a foil for what the lawyer thinks. And I challenge that every single day. And I ask the lawyers I work with to challenge it every single day. You talk about a case where somebody's in pain, and I don't care if it's a discectomy. I don't care if it's a whatever the defense wants to say it is. I don't care about all the issues, all those kind of things. If somebody really was not living in pain before, and now really for the rest of their lives, they're going to experience pain, and it was not their damn fault. Or maybe it was a little bit their fault, but someone else helped an awful lot. Why is that not a huge damn case if it's real? So what we do is we look for the real. We look for how do you get behind, beneath, beside the story that most lawyers tell, which is the red light, green light, the number of times you went to the orthopedist, these pain meds you took, the whatever. And we look to get to the human, compelling story, the why, the what's really going on. And when you hit on it, there's a level of credibility that comes with that that's just hard to argue against. You know, I see in these cases, the defense in these cases, they pick all these things that I think are silly to focus on, things like gaps in treatment, things like pre-existing conditions, things like that. But we as the plaintiff's lawyers accept those as problems. Why? Why are we accepting them as problems? They need to be explained, they need to be discussed, but just because someone has a gap in treatment doesn't mean they're not living in pain. I know people and you know people. You may be a person who lives in pain almost every day and doesn't go to the doctor about it because you've been told there's nothing they can damn do for you. And you wait around in a doctor's office all day. What we are doing is challenging and trying to not buy into what I think is a defense mentality in cases, especially on valuation. And we also look for the cases that we have most outperformed in are cases that have, quote, big problems, end quote. And when you learn how to look at that, quote, problem and incorporate it and find a way that it really fits into the case, it not only stops being a problem for the case, but now there's a new narrative for the case. The case is now about how dare the defense try to play that card to try to avoid the responsibility level that they have in the case. I mean, look at the trick. Look at this. Because at the end of the day, that's what I think juries respond to. So I talk a lot about how can the other side be 100% right and we still win. And I talk a lot about why every juror should care about this case and award a big verdict. And until you answer all of those three questions, you're not really ready to present the case for damages, whether it's in a mediation or in a demand or to a jury.
Now, there's a saying of how you do anything is how you do everything. And I would imagine that over the years that the way that you've worked up these cases, the way that you've maximized case values has helped to build up a reputation and perhaps momentum so that when something like this does happen, judges, jurors, other lawyers, they know how the firm will approach things like this. And it seems like the firms that cut corners or settle for perhaps lower amounts and so on are doing themselves a disservice down the line.
There's no question about it. I can't believe I'm an old lawyer. When I first started, I ran the New Lawyers Division for the Georgia Trial Lawyers Association, and we created it. Myself and another lawyer named Mark Tate created that, and we wrote into the bylaws that he and I would forever be called young lawyers. Someone took that out. Can you believe that? And we're not young lawyers anymore. But I have lived now long enough to know that people do keep score. And the way you live every day matters. And you're writing the story of your life every single day and with every interaction that you have. And so if you want to get all the fluff out of the way of what I'm saying, insurance companies keep tracks on what you do. And they know if you're somebody who is willing to take the case to trial or not. They know if you're the guy who folds at the end or not. They know those things. I've never been a defense lawyer, but I'm told by lots of defense lawyers that the first thing that they do when they get a complaint is turn to the last page and see who signed it. And so from the very, very beginning, I think it matters. And I'll tell you another thing, though. How hard you work the case matters. If you give attention constantly to the case is important not because you say it's important, but because you act like it's important. And that drives value. Every lawyer who has any level of experience, listens to this podcast, knows that the cases that are important to them get their attention. The other ones tend to lag behind. You kind of push them forward. Hopefully you got a good case management program that's pushing you forward, but that's not where your energy goes. So act like the case is important, and the case is important.
Yeah, Joe, just over the years, it seems like there's many times where you could have just ridden off into the sunset. So it's clear that it's money that's driving you, but I know you mentioned that fear is. And in many of the most successful people that I've spoken to and even interviewed on this podcast, the prevailing theme has been that only the paranoid survive. But I'm curious as to why you believe that fear has driven you.
Fear makes us go down different paths. And for some people, fear drives them to drugs and alcohol and reclusiveness and failure. And others, it drives them to be a different kind of addict, one that goes to work every day and on weekends and spends 15 hours a day. And if you look at those things, it's an addiction also. But I think that mankind's constant struggle is a struggle to keep fear and self-doubt and worthiness at bay. And those are all versions of what I'm talking about. So to me now, when I go into a case, there's a huge expectation that some magic's going to happen. Man, it's a scary place to live, man. I mean, what if the magic doesn't happen? And what will I be then if it doesn't happen? Because people are fickle. And there's people who would love to pop anybody else's balloon if you've had any measure of success. So fear continues. I mean, I'm not saying I'm walking around cowering in corners, because I think courage is not the absence of fear. It's action in the face of fear. We call the other thing probably something else. But at the end of the day, I also have this sort of more global fear. It's a different kind of fear, and that's for the world we live in. I mean, I have kids, and I look at my kids and other kids, and I see the innocence. I see a society that in some ways has devalued life and devalued pain, and I refuse to accept that. So that's a fear sort of what we become as a world and as a society. And I'm trying to do my small piece on a case-by-case basis to remind folks, one by one, case by case, that every human being is valuable. Every human being's experience is valuable. I'm not better than anyone else. There's a macro and a micro level. And now that I've had some success, I have more resources to be able to play in that other sandbox. And the reason I can spend so much time now working on safety policy and trucking and going to Washington, D.C. and starting the Academy of Truck Accident Attorneys and doing all those kinds of things and being able to have time away from specific cases is because of some of the successes we've had. Otherwise, I couldn't do those things. So I get to play in a sandbox that hopefully can make some positive change.
So I wanted to ask you about this. As you mentioned, the ATAA, and I know that you've also been the president of the National Trial Lawyers, Trucking Trial Lawyers, and even on the faculty of the Trial Lawyers College. But it seems like you're training the next generation of trucking lawyers. And at the same time, it seems like you have a bit of a competitive nature. How do you view competition in the sense that oftentimes a lot of what you're doing through the training and education is training your competitors?
I do my best to train my competitors. And every now and then I catch myself by the throat and say, what the hell are you doing? And then I turn right around and say, I'm training my competitors, because what's more important is that we leave this place better than we found it. And I think what happens on the defense side is they come up with some new thing or some new idea or whatever, and they hoard it and they won't share it. And they think that as soon as they share it, their value goes down. That's just not the mentality I have. And occasionally it is. It pops into my head, but I let it go. And like I said before, I'm actively mentoring several people around the country who are trying to develop national trucking practices. And the unfortunate reality is there's enough trucking cases. I'm handling fewer and fewer at a time now. I mean, my firm has grown. We have 9 lawyers now, and almost everybody does just about all trucking. From my perspective, I view it as training soldiers to go out there in the world and do good. And all that I can do is hope that it's the right global thing to do. Whether it's the perfect thing for my existence or not, I'm fine. My measure of success for me now is helping other people become successful. People that work with me in my firm, my younger partners and associates, my paraprofessionals who have been awesome and now are able to live a better socioeconomic existence because they've been with us for a long time and they've helped us succeed and we've helped them succeed. But then even beyond and way outside of our firm, everybody I think who has success owes a debt of gratitude to somebody. And the way you pay that debt of gratitude is to pass on what you've learned and build the next generation.
So you clearly have a mindset of abundance. And it's interesting in the sense that as you are sharing everything that you've learned and educating other trial lawyers and trucking lawyers, as you've been sharing that type of information over the years, what type of impact has that had on your firm and even your life?
That's the crazy thing, is people think that it's going to somehow hurt you and actually helps you. Sometimes I catch myself and say, am I really being altruistic or am I really being a marketing person? I want to say that I'm truly being altruistic. When I go and speak at seminars and teach courses, I don't hold anything back. I mean, anything I've got, I give it away. You can go to our portal on our website now and you can get examples of just about anything somebody might need for a trucking case. But the reality is I wouldn't have the stature that I have in the legal community if I wasn't a teacher. In December, I counted because I realized how, in some regards, I've been a good marketer and in many I have not been because I don't work it the way I could, and I haven't. But somebody asked me how many presentations I've done that are trucking-related presentations just in the last decade, and we've been doing this longer than a decade. And so I keep them all because I've got a file folder, and I stopped counting at 500. So that means in 10 years, 500 presentations. You can stop right there and do the math. There have been 520 weeks in 10 years. I've done 500 presentations in 10 years. That means just about every week of my life, I've been teaching somewhere, somehow for the last decade. It's a lot of talks. It's a lot of airplane rides. I see you and your people out at conferences supporting what trial lawyers are doing all over the place. The short answer to your question that I've just made very long is the more I've given, the more I've gotten. It's true every time I teach, I learn. It's this weird dichotomy in the world. The more you give, the more you get. The less you need, the more you get. The more you give it away, the more it comes back to you in spades. And that's true on the financial side, but it's also very true on almost the spiritual side, the parts that feed your soul. Because I have emails and handwritten cards from lawyers around the country and even from some judges around the country. They're very moving. And those are the things that you feel like you've made a difference. Money is just a metric of success. But knowing that you made a difference in someone else's life for real, that's some cool stuff, man. And going back to what I started with, which I don't like bullies, when you can do that and at the same time you've taken down the bully, that's even better.
So Joe, with your schedule and even over the years, I know you've talked about over 500 presentations. I know there's been a rigorous travel schedule with all the commitments you've undertaken. What are some of the things that you do to basically continue to operate in your peak state? Whether it's certain daily practices or certain habits. I've seen you on the Peloton, so I know that perhaps is at least one of them, but I'm just curious, what are the things that you have to maintain to be consistent?
You must have a rear view mirror because I think you're looking over your shoulder to see me on the Peloton. I'm behind you somewhere. But I did. This year is my year to recapture health. So I made a commitment, and a lot of times I'm really good at keeping commitments to others, but not nearly as good at keeping a commitment to myself. But I committed in December, I committed that I would ride the Peloton every single day in the year 2020. And so far, it's now the 8th day of May, and I've not missed a day on the Peloton. It's not always pretty. In fact, it's rarely pretty, but it's making a difference. For me, the things that try to keep me centered is that I feel like I'm on an important spiritual journey. Part of that is religion, but really it's something a little different than that. It's a spiritual journey that involves just trying to be the best human being I can be. And so there's plenty of things for me to work on myself, starting with some things that happened to me 20 years ago. I had some really truth spoken into my life, and I do a lot of work on those areas of my life that I feel are ugly. An example of that is trying to live an honest existence. I told it to you at the beginning of the show before we started that a big part of my life is trying to recognize where I'm being honest and not being honest and fix the parts where I'm not being honest. I'm trying to take care of myself health-wise, but that's a very recent thing. I have worn myself out, done terrible things to my body and all that kind of stuff in terms of just the schedule that I've kept. But now I'm trying to eat right. I'm trying to work out. I'm blessed with a great wife. I'm blessed with 4 awesome kids. I try to be a good husband. I try to be a good father. And I try to keep my mind sharp. And I think, again, when you look for opportunities to live some kind of life of being a servant leader, whatever that means to somebody else, it would mean something different to me. But in my life, that's where I am right now.
If I may inquire, I mean, one of the things that I've always found interesting, and I'd love to get your thoughts, based on your experience, you've obviously had a very successful career over these years. Do you believe that it is possible to achieve the level of success that you've had in the time frame that you have had without the trade-offs and the choices that you've had to make during that time?
I don't know. I told you when we were getting started, I'm working with a life coach right now. It's working on that exact thing, because this isn't a switch that you can flip on and off. Here's the truth. The truth is, I don't have a whole hell of a lot of hobbies except practicing law. I don't spend time with a bunch of friends unless it's related to the practice of law. I've had these successes, but you could redefine success and I would be a failure, because my success is, if there's 8 places to look at where you might be successful, and I've got 1 or 2 of those I'd be a rock star in, the other 6 I'd suck. And so that's the reality. I don't know. I think for me, it goes back to that thing of fear and that sense of, are you worthy, and all those kind of things, and how you deal with that. Some people turn to drugs and alcohol and some become addicts for work. I believe that. I think that there are people who hit it lucky. There are people who go and their first trial out, they get $500 million and life changes. But for most people that do what we do, they go get a big verdict and the next day they get up and go to work. You didn't win the lottery. And it's partly because of what you're talking about, whatever that is innate inside of us that feels that our purpose is and our value derives from these successes. So I don't know is the answer. I personally think it's hard. I think about it a lot, and I might get in trouble for saying this, but I think about it a lot when I think about women who are trial lawyers, because it's so much harder for them. They're better than we are naturally in a lot of things, more empathetic and things along those lines as a general rule. And I know that's already stereotyping, but the reality is it is hard to make those decisions between motherhood and work and all those types of things. It's much harder, I think, for a woman than it is for a man. And maybe I'm being sexist saying that, but I think about it a lot when I see these awesome trial lawyers who have been people who I've been teaching, and I see them go into the struggle mode. You can sense the internal struggle that they have between having to make some of the choices that they've got to make. It's hard. And I guess it's hard for everybody, but for some reason, that's been something that's been a focus of mine over the last 5 or 6 years as I've allowed myself to feel my way into that.
Yeah, and one of the things you mentioned earlier, you mentioned the trial lawyer who gets lucky and their first verdict is $500 million. I would be potentially challenge that and say maybe they got very unlucky with gaining that success very early on without learning the lessons and building the humility, because as the expression goes, life happens for us and not to us. And the way in which you get there, when the way in which you make your money really does seem to matter. So to close this out, this being the Game Changing Attorney podcast, what does being a game changer mean to you?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, to me, I think I would go back and say being a game changer means that in each stage, in each place that you have in your life, that you have the ability to be a game changer, that you are a servant leader. It means that you are bringing up the next generation. I think at the end, we're here to live our lives in service of other people. I find that the happiest people in the world are not the richest people. They're not the ones that the world might call successful from a socioeconomic perspective. They're the ones who most live that way in service of other folks. And so as you get more resources, it's easier to do that, but you don't really need resources in order to do it. That's what I'm learning a little too late in life.
I hope you enjoyed revisiting this episode of the Game Changing Attorney podcast with our guest, Joe Fried. If you found this episode valuable, here are 3 free ways that I can help you grow your law firm. Number 1, download the first chapter of my book absolutely free at GameChangingAttorney.com. Number 2, you can shoot me a text at 404-531-7691 and I'll answer any question that you've got for me. And finally, number 3, if you can leave this podcast a 5-star review, it'll help us gain access to more influential thought leaders and bring their lessons learned here to you. For more information on our interview with Joe Fried, see the show notes for this episode in your podcast app or visit legalpodcast.com.